Hi there, this is Sean, the Honest Book Reviewer, with another book review. In this video we're discussing The Museum of Broken Things, written by Lauren Draper. Here's the book. This book is longlisted as Best Young Adult Novel in the Indie Book Awards, which is an Australian award. I'm not sure why this is in the long list, because it didn't grab me. There's nothing really in the book that gives it substance, and the book just feels like it drags on a lot. There are things that drag on, and the plot feels very loose and very underdone. I don't know about the characters either. I mean, most characters in this book felt flat for me, so there's not much in this story that really grabs me. Reese, our main character, and her parents and her brother, they move home. They move quite a few hours away. And the reason they move is because about 6 months ago or so in the past, before this story starts, one of her best friends dies in a car accident, and she feels overwhelmed with guilt or something about that accident. And we learn more about that as the story progresses, why she feels guilty. And the reason why she feels guilty is just a bit stupid in my opinion, and it just doesn't make sense that somebody would feel guilty for the reason she feels guilty and feel just racked with guilt because of that. It just doesn't make sense. And I found that very disappointing as a plot device. I thought it was badly used. I thought there could have been a lot better reasons worked out in a book to have someone feel guilty for a car accident. The reason given, I just thought was just ridiculous in my opinion. But anyway, they move house because of that. And that's another thing I found strange. In real life, when you think about it, in anybody's life, if somebody's friend died in an accident and you were struggling to cope with it, would the parents of that family decide to pack up everything and move hours away to a smaller town just because one of their children is struggling with that? I don't know if people would do that. I don't know if people would go to that length. They'd probably try to find help for their child, get them some sort of therapy or counselling or something to get them to work through their feelings and their emotions if the child felt like they needed to do that. I don't know if they'd move house because of that. But let's put that aside, because in the story the author has the family do that, and for whatever reason the author wants them to do that in this plot, we'll just accept it and move on. But that did stay in my mind as I read this book, and it did colour my view of the story overall. Another reason they moved to this small town is because Reese's grandmother, so Reese's mother's mother, lived in this small town and she passed away recently. So they were there for the funeral. They're not taking over the grandmother's house, so they're taking over a different house in the small town. You would have thought they may have made a choice just to take over the grandmother's house and live there. But they didn't want to do that, and that was another strange thing to me. And why not do that? I mean, wouldn't the house be willed to them? Wouldn't they inherit the house? That just felt odd to me in the story as well. That the grandmother would die, leave a house there, a perfectly good house by the way, there's nothing wrong with the house, but they decide not to take over the house and live there. They decide to get a different house in the same town, and I don't know what they're going to do with the grandmother's house, because I don't think that's explained in the book. The whole purpose of this plot just felt, it just felt not too well planned out. Part of it is in the inheritance. Reese inherits this mysterious book. And there's something about this book that I won't go into in this video, but it has a particular use. They're not sure which of the two uses it was used for, or why the grandmother had this at the start, and they learn some other things about that as the book progresses. But after Reese gets this mysterious book, and she wonders about it for a few pages, not too long, it's mostly forgotten about. And it's brought back into the story, and the main focus of the story, in probably the last 70 pages or so. So there's a big gap between that, and that big gap is filled with kind of more mundane stuff, and I felt like I was kind of reading scenes from a teenage high school show rather than a coherent plot that was built around the mysterious book that's introduced in the story, and the blurb makes such a big deal of as well. So on the back cover of the book, there's a big deal made about this book. But the book is just missing from so much of this story. Much of the book seems to be about the friendship, then relationship between Reese and Gideon. And Gideon is that trope we see a lot in young adult books. The good-looking boy that's model-like looks, and he's a saint. He behaves so well. He behaves better than every other character in the book. As a trope is overused, I think, in this type of book. Anyway, we have that trope, and he's falling in love, I guess, with Reese, and Reese is falling in love with him. So there's a lot made about that in this book. And that's understandable because Reese is the main character. But I'd be happy about that if these two characters were really engaging and enthralling in the book, and they're not really. And Reese isn't because of the way the author has constructed the character in the story. But I'll discuss that more in the next section in this video. There's other things in the story that I think the author could have made bigger in the story. For instance, Reese's brother Theo, her younger brother, he's a gay character, and it just feels hidden away a little bit in the story. Even though, he's there as a gay character, as an open gay character, it just felt like the character's there so the author could feel like it's an edgy story, but it could have been bigger. More could have been done with this character to make the character bigger and to bring him into the forefront a bit more in the story. That's what I think anyway. The thing I think that was handled the best in the story is Gideon's mother's illness. She has Parkinson's in the story, and I thought that was handled very well in the book. It was described very well, treated very well. The character was handled with much sensitivity, and I just think her storyline and the way it impacted on Gideon was the most engaging in the book. And I thought it made the most impact on me anyway. And when I finished the book, what I remember most are the scenes with Gideon's mother in them. And she's a very small character in the story. So for a book like this, where the author's giving us a lot of characters in the story and some big main characters in the story, it's a very small character in the story that I walk away with in my mind. And I'm not sure if that's a good thing for the book. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But in my view, if the main character is not somebody that's in my mind when I finish the book, and if I don't engage with those main characters enough in the book and only engage with a very small character, there's something wrong with the story. So Reese, our main character, look, I engaged with her a little bit here and there, not too much. But it's that whole thing about her feeling so much guilt, this big thing she carries around about this event in the past, in the town they lived in before they moved, and learning about why she feels guilty, why she feels these big emotions. There was such a letdown in the story, and I thought it was quite pathetic really in the story. And I think the author should have just created something different. Give us a real reason for the character to feel guilty, not something like that. I'm not going to go into what it was. If you want to know, you can read the book. But it was just quite poor in my opinion. I don't think it's something that makes a big impact in the story. When I read it, I just thought, you've got to be joking, really. It just felt like that to me when I read this. Gideon, the model type boy who's a saint, the best behaved person in the whole book. So he's a trope in the story. Look, he's engaging with the storyline with his mother. And I like the way that was written, with those two characters. When Gideon's in the scene with his mother and his mother's going through some different episodes to do with her illness, his reactions felt real. His behaviour felt real. So you do empathise with him then, and you do engage with him then. Other times you don't. But out of all the characters in the story, Gideon has the most growth in the book, in my opinion. And his growth is handled okay in the book. And because he has, an arc, and he has a conclusion, and his conclusion makes sense, and it makes sense to who that character is in the story. So that's a plus in this book. So even though he's not the most memorable character for me, I think he's got the best growth in the book. And I did like his scenes when he's in the scenes with his mother. Theo, Reese's brother, I just think he's being pushed into the background too much. He's meant to be the gay character in the story. It feels like he's the token gay character, to be honest, in the story. And it feels like he's in there so the author can put up a hand and say, okay, I've got a gay character in the story, but I'm going to shove him into the background. That's what it felt like to me. It felt like the biggest part of this character was his anger. He gets angry a lot about different things in the story, sometimes small things, and it felt like the author was making that part of his personality bigger than anything else. His anger was his character, nothing else in the story. And that's disappointing, I think. There are a few things that I think are okay in this book. The Gideon's mother, the character who's seriously ill in the story, her scenes with Gideon were quite good. I thought they were some of the best written scenes in the book. Reese as the main character, I didn't really enjoy it or really didn't engage with. Gideon, his story arc being the most memorable, I thought that was good. So there are a few good things in the book, not too many. And overall, the good parts, there aren't as many as negative parts in the story for me anyway. I rate this a 2 out of 5. I don't think it was worth bringing this mysterious book into the story so early and forgetting about it. That's a big flaw in the story. If you're going to have this mysterious book turn up and make such a big deal out of it when it first turns up, carry that through the story. Make it as big all through the story from then on as it was at the very start. Don't forget about it and then bring it back towards the end of the book. Just lets the audience down when they're reading it, in my opinion. You've got this big gap where that book is forgotten, and it's used to drive certain things maybe in the story, but that book doesn't play the biggest part in those things, and I think the focus should have been on that book more. On my channel, I review quite a few young adult books. If that interests you, check out my channel and subscribe. There's also a young adult playlist on my channel. It should be on your screen now.